Good afternoon, it's 4 o'clock. And this is Newsdrive with Stuart. Tonight, another inquiry into contaminated blood. This time it's UK-wide.
They deserve to be told what went wrong.
The government has announced a UK-wide public inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal of the 1970s and 80s. 2,400 people died after receiving a clotting agent imported from the US, some of which turned out to be infected. There's already been a similar inquiry here, but the Scottish Government says this latest investigation is expected to extend to Scotland and clarification is being sought. Andy Evans from the Tainted Blood campaign has been working to get a UK inquiry for 20 years.
We have evidence that we built up over a number of years that warnings were ignored, that these products would continue to be used despite warnings being present, and also following the actual infections, the sort of mass cover-up that we've witnessed over the years. And we hope that all of that sort of thing will be brought to light.
And as we heard in the news there, Theresa May has ordered a UK-wide inquiry into the use of contaminated blood products in the NHS stemming from the 1970s. 2,400 people have died as a result. Many of them were haemophiliacs who died from hepatitis C and AIDS-related illnesses. In an emergency debate in the Commons this afternoon, the Labour MP Diana Johnson, who's campaigned for an inquiry, said the victims needed answers.
They deserve to be told what went wrong, why it went wrong, and who is responsible for what happened. The story of the injustice they have suffered also needs to be set out and told to the wider public. Their voices need to be heard.
Well, Scotland has already held an inquiry into contaminated blood in the 1970s and 80s. Bill Wright is the chairman of Haemophiliacs Scotland and joins me now. Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Barry.
This presumably is a little unexpected in that it covers Scotland too.
Well, I think my reaction when I heard of this today was, oh boy, here we go again. We lived for 6 years through the Penrose inquiry, and living through public inquiries are not necessarily everything that they're cracked up to be. They can be highly disturbing, highly distressing exercises. And I distinctly recall on the last day that oral evidence was given in the Penrose inquiry, there were women sitting next to me with tears of anger at what was being said in that room. And we also saw on the day that the inquiry report was published that the room was about to fall apart when the report was delivered, with people shouting whitewash. So public inquiries can take us into all sorts of places that we don't actually know ultimately where we're going.
So if we look back at what was achieved by the inquiry in Scotland, what do you think actually came out of it that's beneficial?
Well, one of the most beneficial steps in Scotland is immediately after that public inquiry, the Scottish Government set upon a process of talking to patients and families and those that had suffered, with a view to establishing a system of financial support for those most affected. And everyone who is still alive should now have received an enhanced compensation package. And in actual fact, for the package that's available, particularly to those who were infected with HIV, or most seriously in terms of liver damage with hepatitis C, is much greater than that in the rest of the UK. People south of the border look enviously at the financial support package that's been on offer in Scotland, and that's been continuing to be developed and expanded. There's been an undertaking by the Scottish Government to now look at those who are on what's called stage 1. The widows in Scotland also have benefited in a manner that has not been extended in England, Wales or Northern Ireland. So that public inquiry did spark a whole package of support that's not happened elsewhere.
So there was good that came out of it, despite all the pain and anger that it caused as well.
Absolutely, and there have been other developments as well. For us who've faced problems with haemophilia, there's a whole new approach being taken, and that there's actually a network being set up where patients are more involved in actually talking to the doctors and nurses and physiotherapists within haemophilia centres, and that's that's a process that's ongoing. There was, of course, an apology as well from the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, the day the report came out, which actually meant something to some people. But I think we need to bear in mind that different people have different requirements from public inquiries. Some people want it to result in financial support. My fear is that if this inquiry goes on too long, people are going to have to wait in the rest of the UK for the sort of support that's available in Scotland. And that's a matter that needs to be addressed immediately. We actually, rather than spend years looking through paperwork, taking oral evidence, actually need to meet their needs now in parallel to what's happening in terms of getting to the truth.
So you mean we've had the inquiry in Scotland, actually we don't perhaps need such a big inquiry in England and Wales, we can just get on with it and implement what this inquiry recommended?
Well, that's not going to meet the needs of some people. We need to bear in mind that there are the sons and daughters of people who've passed away who, frankly, money's not necessarily the most important thing for those individuals. Some people just want to see what actually happened. They want the truth. And I think after the passage of 30, 40 years, that's likely to be extremely difficult, particularly when key individuals, whether doctors, officials, or even ministers in government, including Mrs. Thatcher, are not actually going to be around to give evidence in terms of how they saw the matter at the time. Because, of course, a lot of the evidence that might be recorded in paperwork will only go so far. There will be interpretations in terms of memories of why decisions were made at the time. And so we find ourselves in a position where we can either go down an inquiry under the Inquiries Act, the 2005 Inquiries Act, where people are called, there's a judge in place and people are called to give evidence under oath and they have the backing of legal representation. Or we can take the Hillsborough panel type approach, which may look at paperwork, but my suggestion is that paperwork will only tell part of the story, that you actually then need the narrative commentary from those people who were actually involved in the UK government at the time.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. That's Bill Wright there, Chairman of Haemophiliacs Scotland. And we will be getting reaction also from the Scottish Government later in the programme.
The UK government has ordered an inquiry into the scandal in which nearly 2,500 NHS patients died after receiving contaminated blood. The decision follows a long-running campaign by families of haemophiliacs and others who were infected with hepatitis C and HIV from imported blood products in the 1970s and 80s. A similar inquiry has already taken place in Scotland. The Scottish Government said it was surprised that the new investigation is expected to include Scottish cases and that they're seeking clarity. Lord Owen was a Labour Health Minister from 1974 to 76.
They may well have evidence. After all, we know that 300 people have got together and have brought a case, and government have probably seen some of these documents. And they may find in that document one or two very troubling things. I don't know. But something has triggered this after all these years of refusing to have an inquiry.
The time now is 6:10. Now, Theresa May, as we've been hearing, has ordered a UK-wide inquiry into the use of contaminated blood products in the NHS stemming from the 1970s. 2,400 people have died as a result of what the Health Secretary for England, Jeremy Hunt, described as this appalling injustice. Many of them were haemophiliacs who died from hepatitis C and AIDS-related illnesses. Scotland has already held an inquiry into contaminated blood in the 1970s and 80s. The Health Secretary is Shona Robison. She joins us now. Good evening.
Good evening.
What's your reaction to the news of this inquiry?
Well, we welcome the fact that the UK government has finally listened to the many campaigners who have been calling for this and have followed our lead in committing to an inquiry. I think people in England and Wales should get the same opportunity to have their story told and to try to get answers to some of the questions that they have. We are a bit surprised that given the inquiry is expected to extend to Scotland, that we've not had any discussion in advance of this announcement. So I will be seeking clarity from UK health ministers very quickly on the terms of this inquiry and how it will apply in Scotland.
Can you see why an inquiry for elsewhere in the UK would also have to apply to Scotland?
Well, it appears to be a UK inquiry and therefore will apply to Scotland, but there are a lot of questions to be asked and answered, given that we've already had a very detailed inquiry through Penrose, and therefore we need to understand how this might add value to the Penrose inquiry, given that such a lot of time and indeed resources have gone in to this inquiry. But we also, would want people in Scotland who have been affected to have a voice in the UK inquiry. So we need to get clarification on that, and I will be seeking that with ministers as quickly as possible.
You were hearing earlier from Bill Wright from Haemophilia Scotland, and is there really an appetite for people who took part in the Scottish inquiry to then take part in another inquiry? I mean, he said it was 6 years. It was a very painful process for people to go through.
And I absolutely fully understand that. I think Bill Wright makes a very good point, but we wouldn't want to prevent people from giving evidence to a UK inquiry. If people want to, obviously they should have the opportunity. Some people may not. They may feel they've already, as you say, given evidence which was in many cases quite traumatic for them. I think also what's important is that it doesn't take a long time. The Penrose inquiry did take a long time, and what's been important is getting the additional support to people, £20 million that we are spending over 3 years to give additional financial support to those who have been infected with hepatitis C and or HIV via NHS blood or blood products. And there'll be many in England and Wales, or many have been asking why the UK government hasn't been providing the same additional support to those elsewhere in the UK. So I think there will be a focus by campaigners on what this is going to lead to in terms of additional financial support, as we've done and delivered in Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, given that Jeremy Hunt has already described it as an appalling injustice, do they really need an inquiry to establish whether more financial help should be given? Would you call on the UK government just to give the help now and then see if you can learn lessons later?
Well, I think we have led by example in recognising the need for additional financial support. That obviously came off the back of a working group that involved those affected who called for this additional financial support. And we've had quite a lot of contact from people elsewhere in the UK, asking, why Scotland's giving this additional financial support and that they are not getting that additional financial support, albeit the UK government have changed some of the supports, but it's not anywhere near the same level as we are providing in Scotland. So I think campaigners in England and Wales and Northern Ireland as well may well be putting pressure on the UK government, quite rightly, to meantime give additional financial support, because people who are living with the after effects and with hepatitis C and HIV, they need additional financial support. They need extra heating in the winter, for example, and some, being able to not worry about money, I think, is a very important part of the support that we are providing.
Shona Robison, thank you for speaking to us.